I've got some very, very nice questions on one of my other videos. If you want the full context for these questions, I will link to the video in the description down below. It is actually several questions, and I decided that instead of writing an answer, these questions were universal questions. That means that the questions are not personal. They are questions that anybody could ask, and that is why the answer to these questions is also universal and for everybody. But I would like to read the questions first, and then I will address them one by one. So at Hans Christian Lundholm, do you mean that the visuals don't change, but our eyes somehow evolve to see the true visuals as they are? That's question number one. Question number two, it's not really a question, but it's simply, I find it hard to understand how labeling is that bad. Question number three. Again, it's not really a question, it's more somehow a description of the juicy question at the end. If I were to ask someone to feed a cat or to water a plant, I would need a way to describe the thing somehow so he can understand. Labeling is like the words I'm using right now to write this message. How can it prevent awakening? So the juicy question is, how can labeling prevent awakening? But I will take them one by one here. The first question, do you mean that the visuals don't change, but our eyes evolve somehow to see the true visuals as they are? It is a question to a video I've made about labeling and seeing existence as it is. No, we actually do see existence, the pure visual experience is the same before and after awakening. But the question one has to ask oneself is, do we actually see existence as it is? See, I can remember when I was asleep at the wheel. Of course, I did not know it then, but I can remember faintly how it was. When the mind is labeling, it is trying to put existence into boxes. It is trying to organize existence so that the mind has a sense of knowing. For practical purposes, that is perfectly fine. But the dilemma is that I think it was Krishnamurti who said, when you tell a child the name of the sparrow, then the child no longer sees the sparrow. And that is beautifully put. And with that he means that when we label existence, then the mystery is gone. Then the magic is gone. And everything becomes superficial. And every time the mind sees an object that it has already labeled, the mind has no longer any interest. And the mind just moves on. Moves on all the time. And the mind, or shall I say by doing that, the magic is gone. After awakening, we come to realize that existence is miraculous. I can also ask the question, do you see miracles everywhere? That is the gift of awakening. I see miracles everywhere. That is the funny thing. The conditioned mind has everything upside down. And when it hears a message like this, sometimes the conditioned mind is able to intellectually understand this message. It says, okay, I see. Yeah, flower, that is beautiful. But that is not an awakening, because the intellectual mind has it upside down. The intellectual mind still thinks that reality is the conceptual reality that it has built, and that there somehow is another layer that is non-conceptual, and then it still clings to the conceptual fiction that it has built. See, when awakening happens, what happens is that this way of perceiving is flipping. So suddenly you come to realize that the conceptual fiction is a veiling of reality, and that reality, the non-conceptual reality, is prior. That is the foundation. So there is this shift in foundation. And the miraculousness, that's difficult, of everything is a continuous seeing the beauty in everything. I find it hard to understand how labeling is that bad. Labeling is not bad. Good or bad is a part of the conditioned mind. After awakening, we are not talking about good or bad. We are talking about painful or not painful. And that's a totally different story. And when I talk about painful or not painful, I'm primarily talking about psychological pain, or what is known as suffering. And after awakening, when suffering arises, we recognize it as such. And we investigate into the cause of the suffering. And then we come to learn that all psychological suffering is a product of falling back into the conceptual mind. There is some kind of belief that is in direct conflict with reality. And when that belief is unveiled, when that belief is exposed in oneself, then it cannot sustain itself. It starts to dismantling. And when the belief has fallen apart, then the suffering is gone, and there is peace and beauty. If I were to ask someone to feed a cat, to water a plant, I would need a way to describe the thing somehow, so he can understand. Certainly. There is no problem in that. Labeling is like the words I'm using now to write this message. Absolutely. How can it prevent awakening? That's the juicy one. And in some sense, I have already addressed it. It is all about wanting to know the truth. And I can also remember from prior to awakening, I can remember how my mind thought that truth was something that one need to defend. But see, what the conditioned mind call truth, that is what we could call a relative truth. But there are many relative truths. And by relative truth, I mean that the truth that it is talking about is only truth in some context, in some within a story about something, and within that story there can be a truth, but that truth is only the truth within that story, and outside of that story it is not the truth. You see, that kind of truth needs being defended. Because I don't know if you have noticed that, but other people they have other stories. And when they have other stories, they have other relative truths. And then we have fighting over these relative truths. But they have absolutely nothing to do with truth. Truth need not be defended. You cannot hurt truth. You cannot destroy truth. And that is why truth is liberating. That is why truth is ultimate safety. So if one clings to the relative truth, then it prevents awakening. And that is the direct answer to your question. How can labeling prevent awakening? If one clings to one's relative truth, if one is unwilling to investigate into one's own truth, and I would like to point out that it is very, very easy to investigate into other people's so-called truths. That is very easy. That is what the human being is doing constantly, and constantly has to defend its own relative truths. But freedom, liberation, and awakening happens when this willingness to investigate one's own relative truth, this willingness to question the things that we believe in, to question these beliefs that I am building my truth upon. Where does this belief come from? And that was actually quite a significant wording I used there. See if I can repeat it. These beliefs that I built my truths upon. See, truth need not being built. A truth that can be built can also be torn down. And that is why belief systems that creates their own relative truths, these belief systems are constantly threatened by collapse, because they are built, they are constructed. And no, not the funny thing, the tragic of all this is that the human being is willing to go to war, fighting, trying to impose its own relative truth upon others, killing thousands and sometimes millions of humans. That's the tragic. And all we are doing is fighting, fueled by imagination and belief systems, thought patterns. And we might even be willing to destroy the entire planet. That is why awakening is more important than ever. This shift needs to happen if humanity is to survive. The human experiment miracles everywhere. That is the gift, the ability to see miracles everywhere and to see yourself is a miracle. To see all human beings as miracles. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for listening.